A peer-reviewed study now reveals that the more vaccines a baby receives at once, the greater the chance it will develop an infection, respiratory illness, or developmental delays. Welcome to Freedom Alive. Dr. Peter McCullough is an internist, epidemiologist, and one of the most published cardiologists in America. We invited Dr. McCullough to join us on today's episode to discuss what's happening to children as a result of increased vaccinations. I'm so blessed to again be joined by our co-host Mat Staver from Liberty Counsel. And Matt, in 2023, the CDC added the COVID shots to the childhood immunization schedule for children as young as 6 months, despite the known harms.
Yeah, and there's more information coming out about Pfizer, for example, and the CDC knowing for a fact that these shots early on, within 3 months of their release to the public, were killing people and causing hundreds of thousands of adverse events. And yet, right after that, knowing that data, they continue to say that it was safe and effective. And then the CDC now recommends that children as young as 6 months get these COVID mRNA experimental shots that we know, even more so now, that they're neither safe nor are they effective, and they are causing significant physical harm, complications, diseases, other kinds of abnormalities, and even death.
Remarkable information. We cannot wait to arm you with it, but our Freedom Alert is next.
Kansas sues Pfizer for suppressing the truth about the COVID shots. The lawsuit filed by the Kansas Attorney General alleges Pfizer committed consumer protection violations by marketing the COVID-19 shot as safe and effective, even though it knew the product was connected to deaths, serious adverse events, waning effectiveness, and an inability to prevent transmission. The lawsuit states that Pfizer said its COVID-19 vaccine was safe, even though it knew its COVID-19 vaccine was connected to serious adverse events, including myocarditis and pericarditis, failed pregnancies, and deaths. Pfizer concealed this critical information from the public. This is reprehensible. Many people have been killed or harmed by these experimental and unsafe shots. Pharmaceutical companies with any part in this deceit need to be held accountable for these crimes, and more states should step up, like Kansas.
Up next, Matt's interview with Dr. Peter McCullough.
I'm pleased to welcome our very special guest who has returned to this program on Freedom Alive, Dr. Peter McCullough. He is world-renowned in so many different fields. We've gone through some of his past credentials, and it's too much to actually go through on this particular program because it would take us the entire time. But I want to welcome you to Freedom Alive, Dr. McCullough.
Thank you.
Your expertise is incredible, and you are an amazing researcher, prolific reader, prolific writer, not only in what I've experienced with regards to COVID, but also obviously in your specialty of cardiology. But we want to talk about something that is a little different, but it comes out of what we experienced with the COVID shots, and that is childhood vaccinations. We all have to deal with those. Many of us have gone through those childhood vaccinations, and parents certainly are dealing with some of those. Just to kind of set the scene here, within a matter of seconds or, just a few moments after a baby is born, within maybe a 2-month-old, that baby is going to have a long list of CDC-approved or recommended vaccines if someone gives all those vaccines to that young baby. A long, long list. Can you talk about some of those particular vaccines and what some of the research is now showing?
Now, vaccination has been in medicine for 3 centuries now, and it does have a history of having the early vaccines with tremendous safety problems, including the smallpox vaccine in the mid-19th century that became such a disaster. It led to the Anti-Vaccination League. But over time, what's occurred, though, is an increasing number of vaccines for largely legacy infectious disease threats. So when I was born and I, took all the vaccines, my mother took me in and she did what she was told. There was about 5 shots. Now a child today faces well over 100 shots, including COVID-19 vaccination. And the inflection point was in 1986 with the Vaccine Injury Compensation Act. And once the vaccine manufacturers were free of any liability, we saw essentially a vaccine bonanza develop. And the concern is now, Matt, is we've gotten to excessive, unnecessary vaccination that could be leading to serious side effects. And that's the reason why we're talking.
So prior to 1986, if a vaccine pharmaceutical maker, for example, made a vaccine just like any drug and it caused an adverse reaction or death, you could sue them for liability just like any other drug. But in 1986, that changed when Congress passed this law that gave them legal immunity. So if you're looking at before and then after 1986, the number of vaccines shot up. Obviously, you said about 5 vaccines that you would have as a child, and now we're at up to 100 plus?
That's correct. And the intensity in which they're administered continues to amplify. As you mentioned, on the first day of life, a hepatitis B vaccine is given. And I can tell you, listen, I took the hepatitis B vaccine. I'm a cardiologist. I deal with blood and body fluids. That's appropriate for a healthcare worker to take the hepatitis B vaccine, but not for a normal baby. The only circumstance in which a normal baby would ever be administered hepatitis B vaccine is if the mother has active hepatitis B or the mother's is an active IV drug abuser. I mean, that's just one example of a completely unnecessary shot on the first day of life for the majority of babies born.
I know some of these situations that I've talked to regarding parents that may not want or just have no idea that their child is being vaccinated. They're in the hospital and the baby is taken from the mother's room and taken down the hallway. They don't know what's happening because they're not told in many cases. They're then injected with a lot of different vaccines. They come back without the parents' knowledge. They're not even asked. So some of these parents really have to be very conscious and tell the healthcare workers there in the hospitals what their position is on vaccines.
That's correct. And in October of 2023, a new shot was given on the first day of life for all babies, and that's called Beyfortus. Beyfortus is a monoclonal antibody. It's given half a cc, which is a large volume for a little baby, in all babies, and it's a monoclonal antibody directed against respiratory syncytial virus. This has no safety track record. We've never given a synthetic antibody to a baby ever in the history of medicine, and now it's being given uniformly with no idea of what is going to happen to the baby's immune system over the next several weeks or months.
So is this a new type of vaccine variant like the mRNA that's really not the virus that's either dead or weakened, but it's a synthetic version?
Well, this is actually directly the antibody, so it's different than messenger RNA. And we already, in the clinical trials, there was a split on whether or not this was actually safe to do. And now we have data out of France, 200,000 babies have received this, that there's increased mortality. So what the antibody does is, sadly, it actually causes what's called antibody-dependent enhancement, and it enables the respiratory syncytial virus to cause more damage. Now, at 8 months, the baby's supposed to take a full cc of this. This is an example of the biopharmaceutical industry crossing boundaries here, and parents have no idea what's going on.
I think we need to get back to pre-1986, frankly, and Congress needs to take away that law that gave legal immunity, because this is a gold mine for any pharmaceutical company. They can get lots of federal grants for these vaccines, as we saw with COVID-19. And then when they make these, they can recommend all these different vaccines for children. They can have state laws passed to require certain vaccines, and they have no financial downside to it. It's all a gold mine for them. I have a note here, and you might fill this in, but my notes here are that within just, say, 2 months of life, for example, a baby, if they are being treated by somebody who is a CDC-compliant pediatrician, for example, could be injected with Hep B, retrovirus, diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, HIV, 15 or 20 different pneumococcal variants, polio, and maybe, as you mentioned, RSV, and there may be more to that list. So what are we seeing here in terms of the research, in terms of what's happening on the global scale in research about the kinds of vaccines and the number of vaccines as it relates to children?
With the rapidly growing vaccine schedule now, there's been a clear trend for safety concerns. And it's not any specific vaccine, but the fact that they're given in combination. And for some babies, it's too much. You know, at one of the visits between ages 1 and 2 years, a baby's given over a dozen shots at once.
Wow.
This is extraordinary. The immune system can go on hyperdrive. The baby can actually develop not only a fever, but a severe, what's called reactogenic syndrome, resulting in a seizure. Now, when a febrile seizure occurs in a baby, in a paper by Nilsson and colleagues, there's a 40% chance that there's going to be a permanent neurologic injury, ranging from seizures and epilepsy to attention deficit disorder, Asperger's disease, and autism spectrum disorder. And now we have a growing literature that, in fact, excessive vaccination could be leading to the autism epidemic.
I know this has been an issue for so many years where parents, and I've talked to many parents like this, where they say, my child was fine. Then in the day of or shortly thereafter, all these vaccines, there's something that changed in their behavior, and then they are later diagnosed at some level of the autism spectrum. Of course, when they raise those concerns, the pharmaceutical companies say that there's just no evidence to link any of these vaccines to autism or some of these adverse events that are happening to these children. What would you say to parents that are experiencing this right here? Because sometimes they feel like they're alone. They see what's happening with their child, but then they're being told, oh, there's just nothing, that's just a coincidence.
The direct observation by a mother and father of their child is the strongest evidence because they are directly observing their child through the development. They can see the inflection point, which is typically a battery of vaccines that's given at once. Dr. Andrew Wakefield made the seminal observation in 1998. He published it in Lancet, and this occurred with the MMR vaccine in 12 children. It was also associated with lymphoid hyperplasia of the abdomen, so there was some objective changes in the immune system. And these 12 children developed autism. It was clear. 5 studies, now a 6th one just released this week by Jablonowski, show that children who take no vaccines, none whatsoever, they have lower risks of a multitude of problems, including allergies, allergic diseases, and the neuropsychiatric disorders.
With regards to the MMR, the measles, mumps, and rubella combination, there was a time, I understand just from my reading, that they were delivered independently. And then the pharmaceutical companies combined them into one shot, the MMR shot. Is there not also research that if you were to separate those and have those later in life, you have a less risk of adverse events? But when you combine those together and you put them earlier in your life, that's where your increased risk occurs.
The seminal observation in over 30,000 individuals was made by DeLong, published over a decade ago. It's exactly the case that when the vaccines are combined, that's where the danger is. If they are spaced out and given individually, and I think clinically, they probably should be given on a risk basis. Every healthy child doesn't need to receive a battery of vaccines, but in fact, the respiratory illness vaccines may be perfectly appropriate for a child with lung disease like cystic fibrosis. A child without a spleen may need the encapsulated organism vaccine. Where we're moving on this, I think instead of all vaccines for all children, is a much more selective use case.
more of a common sense approach as to what's needed. I mean, why do you need a vaccine at that young age of some of these things that we just talked about, and do it more spaced out? Why, for example, if the research shows this, and it's been showing this for some time, about the combination of MMR and taking it earlier in life causes more adverse events, why do we still have MMR early in life? Why do they not separate it? Why do they not spread it out and use it later in life on a risk-needs basis? Is it because of the monetary issues that are involved?
The conflict of interest issue with the advisory panel, the ACIP panel to the CDC, has been exposed. They have a tremendous conflict of interest with the vaccine manufacturers. The vaccine manufacturers with these combination products feel like they have the market in a sense locked up. And to make matters worse, the public school systems and many private schools mandate the vaccine. So the parents feel as if they have no choice but to actually have their children take these products.
Yeah, whether you're going to daycare or public school, these daycares are doing the same thing. And if you want to drop off your child at the daycare, you have to have all these vaccines. And obviously the pharmaceutical companies are lobbying the state legislators to increase that long list of vaccines because it's a big money maker for them, and then they have no legal downside for that.
Can you imagine, if you had a product that treats an illness, you would have to treat a small number of people in a population. But if you have a vaccine, that means the whole entire population has to receive the product, a product that must be purchased by the entire population with no liability is an absolute boon to any purveyor of that product.
You talked about the febrile seizure risk after vaccination of children 1 to 5 months. The CDC study actually confirms that this early combination vaccine is the problem, and yet the CDC continues to not do anything to protect the public health.
The CDC has turned a blind eye to vaccine safety. They will not do safety investigations. None of the products we've talked about has ever been studied in terms of safety as a combination. So once we get to MMR and we add on the additional vaccines, influenza, pneumococcus, Haemophilus influenza B, et cetera, there have been no safety studies of giving these giant batteries of vaccines to children. And, great concern is that 78% of sudden infant death syndrome under age 1 occurs within a week of taking the shots. The majority of these cases are with basically the night they take the shot or the day afterwards.
Yeah, I think that's a good point where, the pharmaceutical companies may come back and they may respond based upon a certain vaccine, rather than the combination of that vaccine that they're recommending and pushing all together. And you're right, there's no studies on that. It would be very difficult to do that. But we clearly see a cause and effect, at least from the historical information that you see from parents. One day my child was fine, the next day I've got 12 shots and something happened to my child. Now my child's on the autism spectrum or whatever it may be.
Or worse, the child may have actually died in the cradle. Sudden infant death syndrome. We had a legislator in Louisiana, Burl Amadei, who proposed that the medical examiners, for any death under age 1 unexplained, would have to review the vaccine administration schedule and incorporate that in the assessment. And sadly, the medical examiners rejected this, and the motion did not pass to have this legislation come in. So doctors have turned a blind eye to vaccine safety.
One of the things that I think is a problem is not only the pharmaceutical companies, but also the incentives that doctors are getting, particularly pediatricians. Talk about that in terms of when they come in, you're bringing your child into the pediatrician, for example, or your family doctor, and they're recommending getting the shot. From a layperson, you're thinking, well, the doctor has your best interest in mind. But are there other factors at play?
Dr. Paul Thomas, pediatrician, has come clean, and he's reported through the Children's Health Defense that, in fact, pediatricians receive substantial incentives by insurance companies to actually get the panel of their patients vaccinated to a certain percentage, this can amount to several hundreds of thousands of dollars. These are not small incentives. And the insurance companies almost certainly are receiving government money to advance this. Now, the government steps in and pays for vaccines below a certain thresholds of insurance coverage and income to try to effectively have the entire population vaccinated, largely against legacy diseases. You know, diphtheria and tetanus, diphtheria and pertussis we treat with azithromycin. Tetanus we treat with good wound care. We prevent it with good wound care. Haemophilus, the other, these are easily treatable infections. We don't have polio in the water supply. We can go on and on. Almost all of the illnesses that we think of, they were all going away with advancements of medicines long before the vaccines came in. The vaccines did not account for any reduction in diseases that we see. When we have outbreaks, by the way, of mumps or measles, they occur in the vaccinated.
The situation that you have uncovered with regards to this, obviously in COVID we saw this because we saw these incentives by the insurance companies basically putting pressure on doctors to get a certain percentage of their patients vaccinated with this mRNA experimental shot. A lot of the things that you have said from the very beginning through these several years, now research all over the world is coming to confirm the fact that these COVID shots, the mRNA, particularly COVID shots, Pfizer, Moderna, are neither safe nor effective, and yet they're being recommended for children as young as 6 months of age.
We have astonishing and really alarming safety data emerging in children, including deaths of children, myocarditis or heart damage that looks to be permanent, immune system disorders, blood clots. I've seen this in my clinical practice. When the ACIP panel recommended that genetic messenger RNA vaccines be given to children down to age 6 months, with no understanding of safety, and with the FDA cautions that say genetic products have a safety window that extends 5 to 15 years in duration, that act was irresponsible. It triggered the World Council for Health, which is an evidence-based, consensus-driven body, to recommend waiting on all the childhood vaccines. They're the first organization that said it's safer to wait now because the COVID-19 vaccines was the straw that broke the camel's back.
Yeah, and we're talking about the World Council of Health, not the World Health Organization, because they're on the other side of the issue. They're essentially just like the CDC, controlled by the pharmaceutical company, but the World Council of Health is recommending a safer to wait, which is what you, I believe, have also been endorsing. Is that correct?
I have, and I would add here on U.S. soil, the Association for American Physician and Surgeons, AAPS, in 2000, this is 24 years ago, in 2000, passed a resolution essentially calling for a moratorium or ban on all mandates of all vaccines, that no vaccine is sufficiently safe or effective to ever mandate, and that everyone should have their own personal autonomy. Every parent and child unit should be able to make their own decisions free of any pressure, coercion, or threat of reprisal.
I think one of the things that COVID did was make more people suspicious, questioning vaccines than ever before, because I think we kind of got the idea that they were all safe and effective. They were all heavily researched, and we found out that that's not true. For those in the remaining moments, I want to ask you a couple of things. For those that are suffering from adverse reactions of the COVID shots, where would you recommend them to go? I know you have the Wellness Center, but what would be your recommendation to them? And then I also want to ask you the same question about childhood vaccinations, parents that are dealing with this very issue right now.
Well, for COVID-19 vaccine injuries, some great resources. One is React 19, where one can actually give their vignette and disclose it. Another is Truth for Health Foundation, also an opportunity to disclose the vignette. For action items on how to deal with this, check out the Wellness Company. Wellness Company has a product trio called the Ultimate Spike Detoxification. It's based on our scientific work using nattokinase, bromelain, and curcumin, 3 natural products.
For parents, however, those are good resources. And then in general, you would just recommend it's safer to wait. Don't rush into these, and make sure you find out what's happening with your baby when it's taken from your arms by the healthcare workers in the hospital, because they may just take it down the hallway and inject it with all kinds of vaccines.
Do your own research and understand that we have very good data now for a healthy baby to go without vaccines, that they end up healthier over the childhood period.
Dr. McCullough, what is the best way for people to contact you and follow your work? I know you have a lot of information you put out on Substack.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm in practice as an internist and cardiologist, so I do see adults and then adolescents in the DFW area, and I see new patients every day. My Substack is Courageous Discourse. It's the leading medical Substack out there. We have publications every day. My podcast, America Out Loud Talk Radio, McCullough Report, my book, Courage to Face COVID-19, and certainly check out the Wellness Company. I advise them as the Chief Scientific Officer.
Dr. McCullough, thank you for joining us on Freedom Alive. You have been an inspiration to so many people around the world. And talk about courageous discourse. You have been very courageous and incredibly deep scientific researcher. So thank you for your contribution to health, and thank you for your courageous stands. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Matt, what an honor to have Dr. McCullough back on Freedom Alive for really the 3rd time. And this information, our prayer is that it can be such a great help to parents, to moms, everyone facing these decisions. Let's come back to those at home. As a parent, against this big pharma machine, you're feeling very alone. You want to trust your doctors. What can we tell them at home today in closing this episode? What to do?
I would tell them, don't trust your pediatrician, when they say that you need to have all these vaccines. As Peter McCullough said, there's resources that are available, and he said it's safer to wait. And if you're going to have a vaccine, do it based upon risk rather than this just conglomeration of vaccines, particularly early on. It is safer to wait. And if you have a pediatrician that's pushing these shots, or some other doctor, find another pediatrician. I know it's going to be difficult, but don't allow your child to be a pincushion, because their life and safety and their future are literally at stake.
Amen. Again, we delight with every episode to bring truth and to bring guests like Dr. McCullough into your home with this information so that you can make the most well-informed decisions to protect and help your family thrive. In closing, remember Galatians 5, verse 1, which says, "It was for freedom that Christ set us free. Therefore, keep standing firm and do not be subject again to a yoke of slavery." Our freedom is a gift from our Creator. We must never forget that and always protect it. So join us here next time. You'll hear victories as well as ways you can stand up for your priceless freedom. Join us again for Freedom Alive.